guess that's okay. Jerry, are we good to start? Norlee?
Good.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to Standards and Assessment. Again, I know it was not too long that we just saw you all, but I wanted to tell you that since this is election week, I've been thinking a lot about my first election in 1992. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It wasn't my election. I would have only been 20, but it was the first time I voted in a presidential election. And this election was between Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. And I remember watching the inauguration of Bill Clinton, and then imagine my joy, Janet, especially, when I realized that the inauguration was also a poetry reading. Out walked Maya Angelou, poet laureate, to read her poem On the Pulse of Morning. And I actually memorized that because I was that kind of nerd. I decided then and there that I needed to watch every presidential election, but some of you may know this. I didn't know it at the time that inaugural poetry doesn't happen every inauguration. It's only happened 5 times. The first was Robert Frost, wish I could have been alive, at John F. Kennedy's inauguration. And then the last was Richard Blanco at Barack Obama's second inauguration. And I wanted to read one of the inaugural poems to you today, and I couldn't decide because they're all so good, but I landed on the last one, and I decided that in honor of elections, in honor of poetry always, and I was thinking in honor of each of you who each month come together through diversity of thoughts, diversity of personalities, priorities, vulnerabilities, backgrounds, beliefs. And we unite as one committee to make things happen for education in Utah. So here's the poem, and you can see on your screen, it is called One Today by Richard Blanco. And it's a poem for Barack Obama's presidential inauguration, January 21st, 2013. One sun rose on us today, kindled over the shores, peeking over the Smokies, greeting the faces of the Great Lakes, spreading a simple truth across the Great Plains, then charging across the Rockies. One light, waking up rooftops, under each one, a story told by our silent gestures moving behind windows. My face, your face, millions of faces in morning's mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day. Pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, fruit stands, apples, limes, and oranges arrayed like rainbows, begging our praise. Silver trucks heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us. On our way to clean tables, read ledgers, or save lives, to teach geometry or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years so I could write this poem. All of us as vital as the one light we move through, the same light on blackboards with lessons for the day, equations to solve, history to question, or atoms imagine, the I have a dream we keep dreaming, or the impossible vocabulary of sorrow that won't explain the empty desks of 20 children marked absent today and forever. Many prayers, but one light, breathing color into stained glass windows, life into the faces of bronze statues, warmth onto the steps of our museums and park benches, as mothers watch children slide into the day. One ground, our ground, rooting us to every stalk of corn, every head of wheat sown by sweat, and hands gleaning coal or planting windmills in deserts and hilltops that keep us warm, hands digging trenches, routing pipes and cables, hands as worn as my father's cutting sugar cane so my brother and I could have books and shoes. The dust of farms and deserts, cities and plains mingled by one wind, our breath. Breathe, hear it through the day's gorgeous din of honking cabs, buses launching down avenues, the symphony of footsteps, guitars, and screeching subways, the unexpected songbird on your clothesline. Hear squeaky playground swings, trains whistling, or whispers across cafe tables. Hear the doors we open for each other all day saying hello, shalom, buongiorno, howdy, namaste, or buenos dias in the language my mother taught me, in every language spoken into one wind carrying our lives without prejudice, as these words break from my lips. One sky, since the Appalachians and Sierras claimed their majesty and the Mississippi and Colorado worked their way to the sea. Thank the work of our hands, weaving still into bridges, finishing one more report for the boss on time, stitching another wound or uniform, the first brushstroke on a portrait, or the last floor on the Freedom Tower, jutting into a sky that yields to our resilience. One sky, toward which we sometimes lift our eyes, tired from work, some days guessing at the weather of our lives, some days giving thanks for a love that loves you back, sometimes praising a mother who knew how to give, or forgiving a father who couldn't give what you wanted. We head home through the gloss of rain or wade of snow or the plum blush of dusk, but always home, always under one sky, our sky, and always one moon, like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window of one country, all of us facing the stars. Hope, a new constellation, waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together. We are, waiting for us to name it together. I think we're a better committee because we do not think alike. And so I wanted to thank you. And I think it's time for us to do good things together. And there's Scott Hansen. So we are now complete. Anyway, thanks for indulging me, everyone. And before we start on our committee work, we do have some public comment from Cognia, and I'm not sure which member or which person is going to be speaking for them, but I wanted to see if they are here.
This is Tony Bedone, and I'm here.
Okay, Tony, are you going to be speaking?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. Nora Lee, you have the timer, and I think you have 2 minutes.
Very good. Shall I start?
Yes, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Tony Bedone. I'm the Cognia Director for Utah. And I'm so pleased to be here this morning. What a beautiful poem, and I appreciate the service of everyone here. I'm really here just to listen for the most part and to answer questions. The number 6 topic of the future of accreditation is really also about the future of your students. And Utah has already mapped an amazing portrait of a graduate with goals around everything from mastery to autonomy to purpose. And I think that matches our values so much. We stand ready to assist you in solutions finding in terms of how you approach accreditation. And during this very crazy year, with all of the things that teachers and students and principals and everyone are going through, we want to make sure that what you decide to do is a solution that works for everyone. So if we can answer any questions from our vast length of experience with accreditation and our work with other states to find solutions that make things easier for not only those in the field, but those at the state office with less expense, we would love to work with Superintendent Dixon, who we have tremendous respect for, and Dr. Norman and the whole staff to find solutions to whatever the concerns are that have brought this forward.
Thank you so much. Well, committee, I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but we need to thank our committee member, Scott Hansen, because through asking some very good questions, our action item number 1 has actually, we don't need it anymore. It's Jeffrey Van Holten can probably give you more information, but after he looked at the statute more carefully, he found that we don't need the rule at all. So, Jeff, do you want to add anything to that on action item number 1 that we don't need anymore? Jeff?
So Jeff's computer just crashed and he is back on,
okay.
But we can have Jeremy talk to that. I know that he's called Jeremy this morning and talked to him.
Okay. Jeremy, do you want to jump in and kind of talk us through why we don't need the rule anymore?
Yes. So my understanding is, and this may have been a misunderstanding on my part, but the statute, House Bill 460 created the statute. So even though House Bill 460 was passed in 2016, in 2019, the statute was passed. And it looks like Jeff's back on if I'm misrepresenting any of this. So the statute was passed in 2019. We were creating the board rule under the impression that the statute or that the House bill was the overreaching argument and not the statute. And so we were creating the board rule to support the House bill rather than the statute. That is my understanding at this point, but Jeff can probably clarify any misunderstanding.
Okay,
I apologize.
No, I was just going to say, for those of you who don't know, that was Jeremy Barnes from the school safety liaison for those listening online. Okay, Jeffrey.
Hello, Jeff Van Holten, Director of Public Affairs, and I apologize. My computer has crashed and is making a very strange sound right now, which is not great. So I am calling in with Zoom on my phone. But yes, Jeremy is being very kind. This is actually a mistake that I need to own. When reviewing the statute a while ago, for some reason, my memory seemed to think that the statute around the SRO contract simply stated that an LEA needs to have one. And when I went back last night after Board Member Hansen's excellent email and reread the statute, I said, oh, the statute says everything that we are putting in the rules. So compliment to staff. We were thinking along the same lines as the legislature, but it is already in code, actually. So we don't necessarily need the rule at this point. What we need to do is create a model MOU. And so we'll just go in that direction, so we don't need to do the rule today in committee. There's one less thing you guys have to worry about today.
Friday just got better, right? Anyway, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeremy. And Scott Hansen, thank you for asking such great questions as always. So let's go ahead and move to action item number 2, which is the CTE course standards approval. We get to have Talia back, and this is for her annual, she comes back annually to approve the CTE programs of study. So Talia, are you ready to talk to us about this?
I am. My 12-year-old son is unhappy that agenda item number 1 didn't take longer. He's waiting on me to drive him to school when my presentation is through. So he was hoping it would take much longer. But thank you for having me here this morning. I appreciate the time and the committee's work. We're here, as Chair Gravitt said, each November to present and ask for approval on a round of course standards for career and technical education. This year we come to you with, I counted this morning, 55 different course revisions or updates or reviews. In some cases, there weren't a lot of changes made, but just to review kind of the process, and you'll see in your backup documents the list of steps of board-approved process for CTE course standard revision. We have a rotation. We have just under 300 courses in total for career and technical education for K-12. And we put those courses on a calendar of a cycle of review. About every 4 years, each course will be reviewed and updated. We work with a team of subject matter experts that represent secondary education, post-secondary education, and business and industry input as well. And our specialists go through those courses each year. And what you have in front of you this morning is a lengthy but complete document that shows, and we've tried to really do a good job of highlighting what the changes were, if any, in each of the courses. That first page of the 588-page document has hyperlinks, if you didn't notice, that will take you to each of the sections so that you can narrow down and really look at some of those courses. It is a lot of information, I realize, but it's a lot of hard work and a lot of collaboration that goes into making sure our courses are up to date and that LEA's teachers and students have the most current information that they can teach and learn to be prepared for their futures. I think I'm ready for any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you, Talia. And I love the hyperlinks because then I could go any order I felt like.
Right.
Do we have any questions for Talia from committee members? Board Member Cannon, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Talia. Is this your son that was at BYU's math?
No, that's my younger son is waiting for me today. My older son is off today for Teacher in Service Day.
Oh, okay.
He couldn't care less about a presentation.
I was very impressed you had such a math genius in your family.
Thank you.
I had just a couple of questions. When I checked the rule, 911, it mentioned marketing, and you don't have anything here about updating marketing, which just might be a function of the 4-year review. But the rule didn't mention K-8 courses in digital literacy and elementary keyboarding or K-12 teaching as a profession pathway. So is that a concern, or did we add those and they're not in the rule, or would you just talk about that for me?
Absolutely. So if you look at the large document that contains the course standards, number 2 is business and marketing. We've combined those 2 program areas into a group of pathways. So marketing is represented. And then the other 2 are more recent additions that we need to update the rule to reflect. And so the next time we open that rule, which I believe is in coming months, we will update to reflect. We've made a shift over the last 5 to 10 years to really move to align with national career clusters versus program areas. That's kind of a move that career and technical education has made as a whole. And so Utah really reflects that. And just for your information, the national career clusters are undergoing a major revision right now. We expect to have more information about what those revisions will look like within the next year or so. And we'll make adjustments and tweak to fit what Utah needs as we see the national model roll out.
Okay, so that's something we'll be looking forward to. Well, those 2 really piqued my interest, and I love the idea of K-12 teaching as a profession pathway. So I read through that one. I liked a lot of what was there. And could you just talk to me about how this came about, and are kids interested in taking this, and that kind of thing? I'm interested in having them take it, and I'm interested in it being taught and promoted to them. So I just like to hear from you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I've personally been on this crusade to bring education in as a pathway in Utah. It is nationally moving this direction as well. I've been on this crusade for about 20 plus years, and I'm only 29. Again, I'd like to point that fact out.
Prodigy.
Yeah, that math weird in my family can't even make this add up. But it's really something that we feel strongly about. We've talked with board members in the past, with legislators, Superintendent Dixon. It's an area where we feel very strongly that this is a high demand, high skilled career area, and we want to make sure that we're educating students starting early so that they become interested in that pathway and they know how to move forward. We have 3 classes in the pathway right now, along with some potential for concurrent enrollment. We have all of our higher education institutions are very interested in working with us around concurrent enrollment opportunities. There's a lot of connections. We have quite a number and growing every year of students and teachers who participate and are taking these courses. We also have a career and technical student organization that ties directly to the education pathway. It's called Educators Rising. Last school year was our first year of having that organization here in Utah. We had 214 participants. We were able to sneak in the in-person conference, state conference, before COVID impacted everything. And this year we hope to have, fingers crossed, even more students participating, whether that's virtually or in person. But it's a super exciting pathway. We worked really, really hard on it. We continue to update. We know we're not in a perfect place with our course standards quite yet, but we teach for a year or 2, and then we come back and what's working, what's not working, work with our higher ed partners to determine how to direct that pathway.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear you talk about it. Tell me the name of the student organization again.
It's called Educators Rising.
Educators Rising. Thank you. I appreciate that. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Janet. Good questions. And just to piggyback on that, Janet, I have to tell you that where I teach, the junior high is really close to the high school. So it works really well with that pathway. And we have kids from the high school come down. And this year, I actually had somebody contact me a year in advance so they could secure their spot as an intern. And I had to turn away a couple of kids because kids want to do this. And just this Wednesday, one of my high school interns is going to be, we are working together. She asked me about the standards. She's going to be teaching on Wednesday. She's planning a little lesson. We team teach together. It's so fun. My students like it, then they get interested, and the high school kids come down, and she's a former student as well. So it's a great pathway, and I'm hoping it builds like we're growing our own. So.
Oh, that's terrific to hear. Thank you so much.
I know. Okay, any other questions from committee members? I am not seeing any other questions. If there are no other questions, I am ready for a motion if someone would like to make that. Janet, I see your hand up.
I will move that Standards and Assessment Committee approve the CTE Course Standards Draft 1 and forward to the board for approval.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee approve the CTE Course Standards Draft 1 and forward to the board for approval. Is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, go ahead and vote, committee. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. And I don't think, for people listening online, I never said who was present because I'm sorry. So we have Jenny Earl, Scott Hansen, Janet Cannon, Mark Marsh, and I'm Jenny Gravett. So that motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Talia. As we say you're magic. Okay, committee, we are moving on to action item number 3. This is R277625, the Mental Health Screener Program. And I think probably at this point, you guys are quite familiar with this rule. And there's been so much work done with this and so much clarification. And thank you, committee members, for your work in this, as well as Christy and everybody else who's played a part in this. So as you know, this rule is being amended in response to some public comment received by the Disability Law Center, specifically around how we share data. And then we've had to work with, certain definitions, tools and conditions and screeners, et cetera. So I believe Christy Walker is going to be talking us through this one and reminding us what we need to do. And then we'll hopefully have a motion.
Chair Gravett, I think I'll actually have Jeff kick us off. Jeff, if you will.
I shall. I'll try and do this without a computer screen. I'm actually very concerned about my laptop. I don't know that it's going to make it through this day.
Sorry, Jeff.
So we are looking at this one again. I'm just getting my bearings and looking at the screen. Thank you to whoever is driving. That is exactly where I want to look. If you look down on starting around line 21, you'll see some blue and red. What we're doing here, as the discussion has kind of continued around the mental health screener program, a lot of the feedback we received from USSA, the Superintendent's Association, really center, and as well as DSAMA, the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, really centered on the same thing, and that is what is and what is not a mental health screener. As you may recall in this rule, if what you have is a mental health screener, it needs to be one of the ones on the state's approved list, which you have already, or which is, I believe, part of this agenda item, or it's either already been approved. Either way, it needs to be on that list. And if it is not on that list, this rule requires a fairly robust approval process for the LEA to go through to get their non-listed screener on the list, if you will. Because of that, we wanted to make sure that we were very clear as to what is and is not a screener. There's been a lot of conversation around whether teacher observation, which has its own separate elements in state code already, especially when those observations are centered on learning interventions and not behavior interventions per se, whether those suddenly now need to be subject to board approval and go through some kind of formal screener test, if you will. So we wanted to make sure that we actually defined screener correctly. And I want to also add as context for the bill itself, this was House Bill 323 from the 2020 session. The bill doesn't actually define screener. When you go back and look through the bill, it defines kind of what that deleted portion on line 24, as you see in red, what a mental health screener program is. And when you go and read the code definition of that, all it says is A mental health screener program is essentially the program that the LEA is participating in with mental health screeners. So you kind of run on this loop without ever figuring out, so what is and is not a screener? It does not get answered. So that is a long introduction to a very brief edit to this current draft, which is we're defining what a screener is and is not. So you'll see there on lines 26 through 35, or 21 through 35, we defined mental health screener, and we also wanted to make sure that we defined mental health services and mental health as those terms are used in the definition, so that we're all very clear and on the same page as to what we are talking about and what we are not talking about. So the definition of mental health was a definition that we actually collaborated with the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. And just as a side note, the statute, House Bill 323 of 2020 session, requires that we write this rule in collaboration and consultation with DSAMA. So that is a direct result of us working with them on this definition. And then we go into what a mental health screener is, and that is the use of a systematic tool or process to identify if a student is experiencing or is at risk of experiencing issues related to the student's mental health, for an early identification strategy to detect the onset of mental health conditions, enabling the mental health conditions to potentially be addressed. And then we go into the part that I actually think is very important, because we're saying what it is. And I don't feel that A or B is really very unexpected. It should hopefully read as what we've all been thinking this whole time in our discussion as a mental health screener. But we did clarify what it is not. We wanted to reemphasize it is not a diagnostic tool. The diagnosis should be happening as the parent seeks intervention on their own terms with their own providers, with their student. And we also wanted to clarify it's not a system or process used by the teacher to observe behavior for the purpose of targeted learning interventions. And this was a concern that really came up from the Superintendents Association, that, well, if a teacher is observing students and happens to notice that Johnny is also acting strange, and that could be connected to a mental health condition, but the observation was rooted in the intent of observing the students for learning interventions, that process of observation is not a mental health screener. The student might be, the teacher might at that point let the parent know, hey, I've noticed these things about your student. There's a mental health screener program at our school if you want to participate. And that could go that route. But we did not want the teacher observation process to then become subject to this rules approval process. So hopefully that is a lot of information that helps you understand what our goal here is with the words on the page. And I will just toss it back to you, Chair, for any questions from committee.
Thank you, Jeff. That I appreciate how clearly you went through that to help us understand, and I think it's so much better. Christy, did you want to add anything as an overview before we open it up for questions?
Yes, absolutely. Jeff, thank you for running through the rule and just helping to orient everybody to the changes and really the advancements I feel like we've made in the last few months to clarify some of these things. It's been a road, but I feel like the outcome has been really lovely. So I appreciate everybody just sticking with us and helping us to refine this. So I do want to help everybody just kind of understand the different attachments or forms within Civic Clerk. And so in there you'll find, of course, the board rule, the statute, but then there's also 3 more documents. We have the screening tools and the screening conditions, which I'll let Scott Eyre talk a little bit about. And we also have a behavior/risk screening information sheet. And this is where we have loaded everything that we extrapolated from the original document is now housed in this separate behavior and risk screeners document. That was done primarily due to the feedback that we received from this committee as far as concerns that teachers were operating outside of their expertise. They were looking for indicators that maybe they didn't fully understand. some concern about the training, the preparation, and the appropriate identification of students. And so we wanted to compile those things and leave those available for you to view, and also maybe urge the committee to recommend that staff continues work around behavior and risk screeners, so that those guidelines can be developed and that there can be some further definitions around that work. And so, Chair, if I may, I can turn it over to Scott to talk about the conditions and tools.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Christy. Scott Ayer, Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. I want to echo what's already been said. This has been quite a lot of work and a lift that was necessary in order to get to where we're at. I think that we're in a better place today than when we started. And speaking to the list and the conditions, what we've done is taken the original list, and based on the definitions that we were able to come to agreement on, we've divided that list into mental health only list, so proposed mental health conditions, and the behavior and risk conditions. And so speaking just to this rule and to this piece of legislation moving forward, what we'd like to do is propose that the only 3 items that that remain on the mental health conditions list are items that may eventually become diagnosable in nature. So anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation were the 3 that we kept on that conditions list. And because the conditions list and the tools list are married, so to speak, and what happens to one also impacts the other, the tools list was also whittled down just to those tools that identify those specific things. And so that list that you'll see in board docs, draft number 4 on the tools list will reflect that, and draft number 2 on the proposed mental health conditions list. Also, one other item to note, the definitions of those conditions, we remained with the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition in order to look at anxiety and depression, because we felt it better reflect what the screening tools are actually looking for. However, within suicide ideation, we did align that with our suicide prevention's team definition, the National Institute of Mental Health, to better reflect on that definition itself. And again, those lists remain the same from what we looked at in earlier committee meetings. However, they've been whittled down to what they are today.
Thank you, Scott. That really helps clarify things. Let me see what questions we have from committee members. Go ahead, Board Member Hanson.
Hey, my video's working today. It stopped last night. A couple of questions. First about the rule, and I appreciate what's been done to that. I think it's much more clear, but I did have a question on lines 25 and 26. I think that it's clear this was talking about a program before, and now it's talking about a tool. We still say we define a screener as the use of a tool or process, and I'm wondering if we need that, the use of. We just want to define a screener as a systematic tool or process. Maybe I can get a response on that and then move to another one.
I think that's a great friendly amendment. We'd welcome that.
Okay. The next one, line 88. And I understand that it's a pretty robust process to try to get a screener that's not on the list. And I think that we want to discourage that. We want to have not have a bunch of outliers as far as screening tools if we get a group of approved ones. So I wonder if we could add the reason for choosing the mental health screener over a screener that's already on the list. So they would have to say, hey, we've gone through the ones on the list, and here's why we want to choose this one, instead of just saying, hey, we got this one because a vendor came in and talked to us and we like it. Would that be acceptable on 88?
Yes, I think Christy and Scott, as long as you agree, I think that'd be a great thing to have as somebody applies for an addition.
I'm seeing heads nodding, so okay. And thumbs up. Good. Good.
Okay. Then when I looked at the proposed behavior and risk conditions, I like that we're getting into this. I had a little bit as I read through the definitions. So I'm looking at draft 1 of the proposed behavior risk conditions. Some of these definitions, I don't know if we can't do any better. They just didn't seem helpful. Early functioning being defined as early in functioning. I don't know that adds anything to the party as far as trying to define what we're looking at. And I see that some of the screeners are looking, when we look at the screener, it talks about early functioning, and then it goes into some details about what that is. I don't know if I can find it here. There was one of them that looked at early functioning. Assess communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, and personal social. I wonder if we might want to look at that as we move forward to maybe fleshing out that definition. I didn't see any screeners for social competence. We have that defined, but then I didn't see that any of the screeners were looking at that. And I'll just go through this and then maybe I can get a response. And then subjective well-being, I think also we can do a better job there. I guess that's well-being as observed by a teacher or something like that. But as I look at the screeners, but I didn't feel like the definition there really added any clarity. And then as we go over to definition of behavioral health, it looks, there's a couple areas that are really redundant, and I don't know that we've created our own definition of behavioral health. We've listed 3 different definitions that we've found of behavioral health, which may result in some confusion rather than what our definition is for the purposes of what we're doing. So maybe I can just hear a response on those.
Scott, are you going to take that one?
Sure, I'd love to take that one. Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think speaking to the definitions, specifically the conditions definitions, when we talk about early functioning or subjective well-being and the tools associated, the several tools that are out there may look at those in a different way. For example, subjective well-being, there may be 3 or 4 tools that have a different opinion on what that means or what that looks like. So these definitions, we're hopefully trying to come together in a way that at least clarifies what they are together. Early functioning would be another example of that. And we try to, within the tools list itself, specify what that specific tool actually is looking at. But really good questions. I believe that social competence was on that list, and maybe it's one that we could pull off because of a tool that was there originally that maybe the board had looked to remove. And so we'll have to double check that one. And then maybe I'll have Christy speak about the other definitions, the behavior, health, and other definitions that were agreed upon between the division and I think went through our attorneys for those.
Yeah, so let me start by saying the behavior and risk conditions document is not one we necessarily have to decide on today. It's more of an informational document just to kind of house everything that is not currently part of the statute and the rule that we're trying to pass today. And so as we look at some of the definitions like behavioral health, that one was pulled from a couple of different valid sources. However, that being said, you're right, it's not something that we pulled together and worded to directly represent USBE or DSAMA. It was something that was already existing. And so we are open to any changes on this document, although that's not the work today, but we absolutely welcome feedback as we hope to continue this work with your blessing. And so, yeah, all of this is just kind of the foundational pieces and the recognition of we understand that work still needs to happen here. And so I would encourage all of you, if you have concerns related to this document, please email myself. You can email them all to Jeff. Jeff can pass them along to Scott and I. And we would really like to hear your thoughts as we continue the work on the behavior and risk conditions.
Thank you. Board Member Hanson, do you have a follow-up or?
Yeah, and I really appreciate the work that's been done on this. I think that we're in a lot better place now than we were before. I would encourage you to keep going on those definitions, and maybe we can get, a more user-friendly document, I guess, one that's helpful on some of those. But I appreciate the direction we're headed there as well. I also really like that we've taken the mental health conditions down to just those 3 core ones. I think there are lots of other mental health conditions, but trying to identify those through a screener, I think, is just a real reach, and we'd get into some territory that's not really a good place for us to be. So excellent work. I think with those couple of changes on the rule, I'm ready to make a motion to accept that rule and pass it on to the board, unless there's other comment that needs to be made before I do that.
You can go ahead and make the motion, and then we can do some discussion. So if you want to, I guess you made the motion, right? Or do you want to make it officially?
R277-625, and pass it on to the board for approval.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that we approve R277-625 draft 1. I'm going to say as amended because of those little technical changes on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Do we have any?
Draft 2.
That's draft 2.
Amended.
Oh, draft 2. Sorry. And then we have some questions. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I on a couple of definitions as well, and I'll just give you one of those. Let me pull it back up. Sorry, I had to go out of the document. For example, on weaknesses, we have the definition of fault or defect, where I would suggest something more like lack of strength, because it suggests that there is improvement, right? A weakness is nothing more than something that could be improved upon, right? So I'm not, and I don't know, we could work with that or even add that to it, but a fault or defect, it sounds like there's something wrong that is not repairable, and that's not the case. With weaknesses are things to overcome. So however we need to word that, I don't know, that's just a suggestion, but I would recommend something a little stronger there. I'm grateful for Scott's in-depth analysis of some of the others. And then I do have a question on the draft. Hold on, let me pull it back up. Sorry, our internet's a little slow today. So we've added on here, which I do think is important to distinguish the difference of what is not. And specifically what is not is a system or process used by a student's teacher to observe behavior for the purpose of targeting learning interventions. So we've identified that, we've narrowed that down real specific. So we know if you're using it to target certain interventions or, that kind of a thing, which I think is great. It eliminated all those little things, behavior things that teachers take care of, right? At the end of the day. So, but it brings up this one that's being used still. And I know we said, no, this is something else, but we're not measuring. It's the student risk screening scale, the internalizing and externalizing SRSSIE. But the things that are being measured here are things that I think you would almost, to me, I think you would have to have a specialty training to really, these aren't just things that a teacher just, anyways, let me read some of them because it's anxious, it's lonely, peer rejection, low academic achievement, a teacher could easily identify that, right? Emotionally flat. These are things that I think someone with training needs, not your regular teacher. So I'm anxious. I think that one was on there earlier, but and anyways, I'm concerned that some of these items that we're using as academic indicators really weave into our other areas where a more professional analysis needs to take place. So I'm concerned that we still have some of those outliers out there that don't fit within this. And I think this helps, but I would hope all districts would be really cautious about how they're using things and what they're using and making sure proper training is taking place. So I just, that's all the questions or comments I have, other than I will not be voting for this. And it's not because I don't support kids getting the services they need. It's the broad approach we're taking for all kids kind of a thing, the assumption that there's maybe some error in all children. And I'm concerned that we may be, where we take a child's mind is where they go. Instead of, as we notice the needs, we're getting specific help. So it's the broad approach, and I'd like a more specific for the children themselves instead of this broad screening. But anyways, that's my comment. And I bet I do, with that being said, you have done fabulous work. I think this is about as clean as we can get it. I don't, in saying that, I don't mean to disparage anything here, because this is, if we're going to do it, this is what we need to do, right? So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Does anyone want to respond to some of her concerns or questions?
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Christy.
I just want to say, Board Member Earl, that I do appreciate your perspective as far as being sensitive to seeking out strengths in our children and not just seeking to find fault or weakness or defect, whatever that may be, because that's in all of us, but the strengths are better and they're bigger than our weaknesses. So I appreciate that perspective from you.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. Board Member Cannon, I think you have a question or a comment.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now.
Thank you. I just want to, as I understand it, when I was listening to Jeff, he said that these screeners are not meant to diagnose. Correct? So what we're doing with this is we're screening for conditions that may then go on to have some kind of a diagnosis. And the only things we're screening for specifically are depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation. If I got that correct?
She does, right, Christy?
Okay, I'm a little baffled as to how early functioning is a risk behavior or condition. Can you talk to me about why we have early functioning on there and how that plays into all of this?
Yeah, who would like to respond to that?
So, yes, Scott.
Go ahead.
Rock, paper, scissors.
I will take this. Sure. So in our original attempt to build out a list of screening tools that were being used in schools, early functioning was one that we received that folks were using within schools. And that was a very front-end approach to seeing what behaviors or what factors were playing into children's lives. This was not something that was directly tied to mental health, and which is why we moved that over to the behavior and risk screening tools list, which to Jenny's point, we really have an opportunity to look at that list and ask ourselves, what do we do moving forward in that particular piece of work? That said, the reason why anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation are on that mental health screenings list, which is what the work is before us today, is to really say that these are potentially diagnosable things, conditions that that schools want to look for and want to be proactive about, and that we can look at the behaviors and risk screening tools list and decide as a committee and moving forward how to implement those in whatever form moving forward.
Okay. Personally, I don't see how early functioning ties into all of this. I think it creates more confusion than it is helpful in moving this forward. That's my opinion. Especially when these screeners are not meant to diagnose. A lot of them are done by observation of teacher or parent. And I assume what happens is we use these screeners, then make a recommendation for follow-up with professionals. Correct? These screeners are just to be used as a screening process, and then the follow-up is done by professionals. Have I got that correct?
Correct. A screener would give us one data point that we could then decide how to move forward.
Okay. I have a couple of kind of concrete, tiny amendments on line 69. All pre-approved mental health screener shall comply. Shouldn't it be screeners with an S?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Good catch, Janet.
And on line 154, I think there's some redundancy. An LEA that has elected to participate as described may receive reimbursement for relevant services obtained by a qualifying parent that qualifies for financial assistance. Could we not just say may receive reimbursement for relevant services obtained by a parent that qualifies? Isn't it redundant to say a qualifying parent that qualifies?
Yes, however, qualifying parent is a defined term. So we might want to just change on line 155 the word qualifies with a synonym.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Janet?
Yeah, I noticed that they used qualifying parent subsequently after that, in the verbiage as it went forward. So
Yeah, a couple times there.
all right, those are my questions. I still don't get early functioning. I don't see how that ties into all of this. I think it's just confusing and muddies the water, but
that could be something that could be worked out in the definitions and things like that, because the rule doesn't really, it ties to it, but it doesn't really talk about early functioning. So are you okay with that, Janet?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry to chime in. Could I just ask about the qualifying parent? Does a qualifying parent necessarily qualify for financial assistance? I think those are two separate things. I think you can be a qualifying parent and not qualify for financial assistance if I look at the definitions. So it reads funny, but I think we may need to have it that way. I'll defer to Jeff, but I don't know that just because you're a qualifying parent, you qualify for financial assistance.
Jeff, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, you are technically correct, especially where the amount of money was only $500,000 statewide. So you could be a qualifying parent and there's just no cash because we've already awarded it out. I would need a little bit of time to kind of rethink the verbiage, but if the committee would like, we could kind of rework that line 155 and promise that we would have at the board meeting terms that might appease all of you more, and I can send an email out as we work through that.
Does that sound good, everyone? Anyone object to that? Scott, are you feeling okay about that?
Oh, that's fine. I agree with Janet. It reads funny, but I don't know I just don't know if we need to have it that way. Sometimes legal stuff doesn't read nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you. That was a good point you made, Scott. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Any other questions from committee members? Okay. Well, then let me remind the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277625 draft 2 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Committee members, go ahead and vote. Okay, that motion passes with Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Hanson, Board Member Cannon, and Board Member Marsh. You disappeared. I think I saw you. Voting yes, and with Board Member Earl voting no. Oh, there's Mark. Mark, your number disappeared on your name, so.
Okay, I'll get it back on.
You were way down. I had to crawl to find you. Okay, Nora Lee, you got that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Christy. Yeah.
If I may, The way the rule's written, and this is a question and a statement, do we need to approve the conditions list as well as the tools list as well? Jeff, I'm kind of looking at you. Do we need an action there?
Yes.
Okay, so does somebody want to make that motion? Okay, so let me go back here. Okay, so we need to approve the conditions list and the tools list.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and just make that motion. So I move that we approve the behavior risk conditions definition screening tool list, draft 1, as well as the mental health screening tools list, draft 4. Is there any discussion to that motion?
Chair?
Yeah.
It would not be the behavior risk screening tools. It would be the mental health for both.
Just the mental health.
Mental health, yes.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Thank you, Christy, for helping guide. Okay, so I'm going to make the motion. The motion is to approve the mental health screening tool list, correct? Okay. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, committee members, go ahead and vote on that. Okay, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much, Scott, Christy, Jeff, for holding our hand and for just doing good work. And committee members, thank you for all your work on this too. Okay, we are on action item number 4, the annual core standards rubric data review. I think Janet's been here the whole time since we started this, and then Jenny and Scott and Mark joined us later, but this has been kind of a nice process for those of us who have watched it evolve. And Jennifer Thronson has done so much work on this, and she's going to talk about the annual core standards rubric data review and what we learned from it and what we need to approve. Jennifer?
Thank you. Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Appreciate being here with you this morning. We have a few agenda items. So our first one is to take action on the annual core standards rubric review. Specifically, this is required as a board policy 3002 as part of determining if the board should recommend if a set of core standards should go for revision outside of the board's approved timeline. We implement an annual survey to kind of ask the various community stakeholders on their feelings about the standards and if a revision is kind of warranted as part of the broader rubric review. So you've been able to see in the board backup the different rubric results for each content area. They are summarized in the survey results 2020 document. So if do I need to look at these 12 different attachments? The summary is in the survey results 2020, where you can see not only the respondent information. I did share with you the complete survey results if you're interested in digging more deeply into any of those comments, but tried to tabulate those just from a high level overview so that you could have a quick summary. Overall, basically the findings of the rubric results do not yield a need to queue any standards revision for earlier than they are anticipated on the current timeline. You'll notice that the ones that are currently up for revision did score the highest in terms of that rubric. So it just was hopefully reinforcing to you as board members who have been through the process, either from the start or are joining now, that the rubric is doing what it's anticipated to do, which is to queue standards appropriately for when they are due. And so we have our 7-year timeline. And this rubric just keeps to make sure that we're attentive to the needs, the changing demands, and whether there's any warrant for that. So English language arts scored the second highest, and that one is actually going through revision right now. So it is showing that we are matching well. The highest scoring rubric was social studies, and a higher score means more need for a revision, specifically the elementary social studies, which is also going through revision right now. So at this time, the results from the survey, as well as doing the rubric, which incorporates the survey results, don't indicate a need to queue any standards for revision based on the feedback as well as the analysis by staff. So with that said, the recommendation for the committee is just to recommend that the board approve the timeline, and there are no needs for revisions, that what our current cycle is appropriate. So I'll leave it there. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. It's nice to know it works. Board Member Earl, you have a question.
Yeah, can you speak to me about the survey, just a little bit that was given? How is that disseminated, that kind of information? And then I have a couple more questions, but if you can do that first.
Absolutely. So we disseminated it through various kind of stakeholder groups. So Mark Peterson sent it through his kind of public marketing angle. So the UEA, just online through our social media, we sent it through all our listservs, as well as like the parent communities. So I think it's Utah PTA. There's another one though. UEA. We tried to get it out there as broadly as we could. And that summary, I'm just trying to get into Civic Clerk, is in the remarks as well.
I saw it. I guess I was surprised it was, I mean, for standards, that it was only 91 people. You know,
yeah.
Really a poor showing, meaning if we're making some pretty broad and changing. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because as I've gone out to schools and I've tried to visit, actually I visited about 12 last week, but what I'm finding is they're saying, quit changing stuff on us. So I'm trying to figure out the balance here because, you know, a lot of these schools have got their systems all set up, and a lot of them have only been, some of the things they've only put into place the last 2 to 3 years. So they're just now working, they've worked out all the kinks and everything. They've got their formative common assessments all figured out. And so every time we change a mass amount of standards, it takes them 1 year to figure out what that means. Then it takes 1 year to start writing stuff. And then it takes a year to implement. And then it takes 2 more years for them to get it figured out. And so I just have a concern. I understand we've put this process into place, but as we continue to change things dramatically for educators, it's hard. It's hard. And it's hard to know that there's 2 more coming down the pipes right now, right? I mean, this is a very, I don't know, the 91 voices are not an accurate representation of the frustration that's in class, I guess that's what I'm saying, because I've asked principals and some educators about this specifically because this was coming, and this is a concern they have, is how frequently we change things. And as soon as they get, you know, what seems to be something in place, okay, I'm being repetitive now, but it just, you understand what I'm talking about and the concern there? And so how do we prevent this continual changing of things once people get things set? How do can't we have a set standards? I don't know that everything changes that much in a 5-year period of time or whatever. Anyways, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, may I respond?
Yeah, Jennifer, respond to that.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. Those comments did come in the survey. Obviously, the stakeholders are various. So there's parents, community members, teachers. The teachers definitely had a voice of, we're good. Give us some time to kind of adjust to these. With the new cycle that the board has put into place, we look at revising every 7 years, in particular in all of the standards. Within that revision of 7 years, it then takes us about 2 years to get the revision done, with the next year being kind of like the soft, here they're aware, they start building awareness, but it's generally a decade now before they actually change in this plan. So the nice thing about what the board has done over the last couple of years is made a more predictable pattern, as well as made a length of time that's more doable. So if we look at mathematics changed in 2010, 2011, 2013, and I think 2015. That's a lot of revisions that this new process doesn't afford unless there's a big need from the field and from the community saying, hey, we need something different. As we go through the standards revisions now, the intention of those those review committees that we start with is how big of a revision is needed, and asking those partners of our education system to give us that insight, and then our review and writing committees really take that information to move forward. But with the new cycle, I think you'll see a greater reduction in terms of that change over time. Honestly, ELA has been in place since 2011. It'll take us until 2022 to be able to change those standards under this new protocol. So it will be a decade before those are changed. So at this point, I think we're getting to the right place, but what people have experienced prior did seem like, oh, what's happening now? This new process does, for those that know that it exists, does seem to ease concerns related to the comments you're getting from the field.
Yeah, and Board Member Earl, as a teacher, I appreciate what you just enumerated, because in the 26 years, I think part of the issue for me has been there's not been quite a predictability about it. And it's like, what, and when you're not familiar with what's going on. And so I really appreciate the predictability, but I also appreciate that just because a subject is under review, standards review, doesn't mean that it has to be dramatically reviewed. And I'm just speaking as an English teacher, I'm like, if we could just maybe make it a little bit more, reachable, because there's so many in English language arts. And so I hope that, as they go through this process, that they're just going to kind of hone them down, is what I see. So hopefully it's not too dramatic, because I agree with you, Jenny. I'm just like, please stop giving us something else, because it feels so dramatic. But so thank you for your comment. And Jennifer, thank you for explaining.
I was just going to say, I wish that were the case, because the last two we went through.
Well, yeah, I think those were an anomaly a little bit.
Mass changing. So I mean, we're saying that, and we know, but then at the same time, staff or who, I don't know who's ever at the other end of it, is not doing that. So I don't know how it's not getting to the end of the row there. And the reason why we had such dramatic changes one after another is because the implementation of Common Core, and then having to revise in association with that came in rather quickly, which we should always be concerned with. When a movement comes quickly, there should be a concern, because you're going to swing too far and then have to pull back. I feel like if we're not careful, we'll end up doing that with other things. Anyways, thank you.
Well, yeah, and I think that with health, for example, because it had been 20 years, it was a little bit dramatic, because not only it's so different than ELA, because what's the research going to say? Well, there is research, but health requires a lot of new changes, a lot of things that happen in science and things like that. So the predictability, and then I think that would help a lot, because 20 years is a long time, especially for a subject like health. So great discussion, great concerns. Do we have any other questions for Jennifer? Two Jennys and a Jennifer. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. I was just, as I looked through these charts, we have a chart that goes up. Remind me at what metric level revision is triggered. So we have all of these little numbers here, but I don't see on the document where we put what the trigger is. So will you give me that metric again?
Yeah, so the board didn't pick a particular number. It is meant for the board to say, ooh, that seems high. In general, what we've seen is 0.4 or higher being a cue mechanism for consideration. So, for example, English language arts is a 0.47, social studies is a 0.59. The next closest you have to that is library and media at 0.3, but you'll see it's due for revision next year. So in terms of the rubric, the way that it's queuing, it seems that 0.4 has been our threshold. We haven't used it in this way, but when we set the rubric together and showed the initial kind of analysis last year, 0.4 seemed to play well as we looked at which ones were up for revision, and they were playing at that 0.4 level or higher. So although we haven't set a threshold on it, because it's really meant to allow the board members to have that flexibility, 0.4 seems to be that threshold.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I received, a while ago, an email from a parent who really wanted to write or to be involved in rewriting the standards. And it's my understanding that those committees are chosen and they are in statute. Am I correct on that?
So the ones that are in statute is the review committee. So that's where it goes 5 parents from the Senate, 5 parents from the House, and then 7 members that the board recommends. So if you do have folks that are interested, those are names you can share with, I believe we go to Board Chair Huntsman for that recommendation. And so generally staff will send some recommendations. So if you are getting those, you can send it to staff who would be leading. So if they want to be part of ELA or social studies or wherever their area of interest is, we can keep them on a list that we can then send up when it comes time for a particular revision. If they're just interested in standards in general, the board does have 7 seats to fit on that review committee.
Thank you. So Chair Huntsman is the one I should send the name to.
Yes, he makes the recommendation to staff of who the board is choosing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And copy Lorraine, if I could just weigh in. This is Sid. So I'm just copy Lorraine and Chair Hudson. Thanks.
Okay, Board Member Earl, do you have another question? I see your hand still up. I didn't know if it.
Yeah, sorry. It sparked my. I mean, we haven't heard from our social studies writing group, right, at all that I know of, other than at the first of the year. When are they to give us a report? It seemed like last time there were reports that were coming in on progress. That was consistently happening with health. Have they not begun that yet just because of COVID?
Do you know that, Jennifer, or do we need to?
We've got Jody Parker in the room. If it's a health question, I'm gonna.
No, it's not a health question.
Okay, sorry. I was typing to Scott's chat box and I was distracted, so go for it.
Yeah, let me say it again. Sorry, that's okay. The social studies standard revision, we haven't heard from them yet. When it was health, they were continually giving us updates. And I'm just wondering, do you know when that's scheduled? It's been like.
It'll be coming next month to you guys. So it's every other kind of meeting. We had to get to actually getting the review committee, which got delayed because of COVID. So he is planning on December for that. We already chatted about that.
I was just wondering where we're at.
Yeah, no, it's been a while.
Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
I just had a quick question kind of relating back to what Jenny was talking about, Jenny Earl. And I was looking at our rule on the core standards revision process, and it talks about, doing a revision outside of the established timeline. When the timeline comes up, do we have the option to push back a core standards revision? Is that in rule? It makes sense that it would be, but when we're on time, do we have to make that under our rule, or do we need to make some changes there?
Great question. I want to take a look at the rule before I respond, unless Jeff has any insights before I get there. I believe you have authority to make changes to the timeline, that you could queue or not queue a set of standards for revision if there doesn't seem to be a need. Generally, the review committee has been the ones who make that recommendation of this one is up for revision. Let's see what the review committee says if there is a need to actually revise them. But I don't believe, and I want to just pull up the policy and around this one, that there's not the authority for the board to make that decision.
It has to come to the board, though, for approval to move forward. So we do have that authority, not necessarily in the rubric, but you bring it to the board.
Yeah, in step one of the standards revision process, the first step is board approval to start the revision. So at that time, if the board chose to say, you know what, we're not going to do a revision, they would probably just need to say hold and give a timeline of when to come back to staff.
I appreciate the reminder on how that works. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't locked in, because when I'm looking at the rubric rule, it just says when we're outside of the timeline, here's what needs to happen. But it in that rule, it looks like a revision is going to happen when the timeline opens. But I understand they'll come back to the board and we can shut it down then if we need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Just want you guys to check your hands because I see a lot of them up, and I just want to make sure that you still have questions. Board Member Hanson, another question?
No, I've just got my hand stuck up.
Well, that happens sometimes. Trust me.
Mr. Gravitt?
Yeah.
I just wanted to point everyone to the screen. My computer is back, everyone. So thank you, Ben, for getting me while I figured this out. This is the code on the standard review committee process. And just as it says up there in subsection 1 and Board Member Hanson, I hope this is answering your question. I apologize if I'm taking us down a rabbit hole. But the board is supposed to establish the timeline for review by a standards review committee of the core standards. So in speaking to this requirement, the rubric and creating that timeline that you have all approved through the rubric is satisfying that statutory requirement.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jeff. Board Member Cannon?
Thank you. I just thought of another quick question for Jennifer. When we go through these standards, is there any thought or any insight into how rigorous our Utah standards are compared with core standards across the United States? Do we have any element of rigor or comparison for rigor between our standards and other state standards?
I'm unaware of any if there is. So when we had the core standards, obviously they compared states at that time before the Common Core standards came out for ELA and math. But anything beyond that from over a decade ago, I have not seen anything recently that does a comparison, nor have we done anything internally to compare our standards to other states.
It's a good question, Janet. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we are ready for a motion if someone would like to make that. Board Member Cannon?
I will move that the committee recommend that the board approved timeline for revision remains as is, given the revision trigger rubric did not yield any need for queuing a revision out of cycle.
Okay, thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee recommends that the board approved timeline for revision remains as is, given the revision trigger rubric did not yield any need for queuing a revision out of cycle. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, go ahead and vote now. Okay, I heard all the little clicks. It sounds like that was a unanimous vote. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, you're not going anywhere. What am I telling you to no thanks to you. Stick around. Okay, committee members, our next action item is supplemental standards. And this one deals with our supplemental courses for yoga, strength, conditioning, dance, and recreation. So I bet we have Jody on in the background if we need her. So Jennifer, go ahead and talk us through this one, and then we'll see what questions we have.
Absolutely. So item number 5, supplemental standards. This is basically a similar process to what CTE and Talia did for item number 2, but for teaching and learning and core standards related. So we have a process that for the supplemental standards, which are courses that are considered the applied and advanced, which is what is in board rule. These are student choice courses that are required for graduation, but there's options for which courses they take. So for example, there's 4 credits of English required for graduation. Students have to take English 9 and 10 and some version of 11, whether that's AP, IB, or CE, or regular English 11. And then English 12 has lots of options that kids can pick from. But because it's a core graduation requirement, we are required by code to have standards for supplemental. This is something we recently identified, and we're with you several months ago coming up with what would the process be, how do we go about this, and modeled that process after CTE's process. So thank you to Talia and her team for already having a well-established plan. We instituted that same plan with Jody's work in health and physical education. We have other staff members that will be bringing more in March. We've got world languages and science and English, all planned to bring you additional course standards for these supplemental courses moving forward. So we have a 2-time-a-year cycle. We have a March and a November. So this is your first iteration of the November teaching and learning core standards, supplemental course standards that we are bringing to you for approval. So basically at this time, Jody was the worker bee of the staff who was able to put out the first 4 supplemental course standards, and those are up for your review and hopeful approval of these courses. But they have gone through, we convened a committee to develop the standards. We released them for 30 days for feedback. Similar release exactly to how we did the annual standards release, with getting it up to various stakeholders. And then we revised the course standards based on the feedback, and Jody did a great job of articulating what changes were made based on that feedback in the summary documents. And then we are at step 4, which is to submit the standards to you for review. So with that, if there are any questions, we'd be happy to ask. If there are content-specific questions, Jody Parker is here to to help with those, as she is the expert for content. But if there's a process question, I would be happy to handle any of those.
Okay, committee members, what questions do you have for Jennifer or Jody? Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
Question for Jody, I think. This one is about yoga. And I am certainly not the yoga expert, but my wife actually is a yoga instructor, and she teaches at the Canyon School here in Ogden for the handicapped kids.
Nice.
So I had her go over it for me, and she thought it was an excellent document. She really appreciated the way it was laid out. But one place where she's had some issues that I just wanted to get some clarification on 2.1, it says learn and define yoga and yoga philosophy, and then it goes into some of that. And there's been some confusion with some parents when she's teaching about yoga and religion and how all that fits. She actually had a father that wouldn't let his kids come into the class. I think that the way it's laid out, as long as that's taught as like a world religion course, these are some of the philosophies of yoga, but there are some that would be fine. But some of the teachers are very into the philosophical, the religious ties to Hinduism and that sort of thing. And I think that could be problematic, maybe, if it went that direction. I don't know what the thought is there, if somebody can help me understand that.
It absolutely was a discussion with the writing committee. I had to pull it up real quick. And I apologize if you guys start hearing noises. My son is waking up from his nap. And I'm sitting in his room. So if you hear weird noises, just, I have a 5-month-old. So we had a really big discussion about this actually when they were doing it and putting the standard in, where they want to stay away from, really specific religious things, which is in statute anyway. We don't have, specific religious conversations in school anyway. So our teachers should all know, and our administrators and our district leaders, when they're helping their, sorry, I have a bird apparently, y'all. He was a bird for Halloween, in case anyone wanted to know that, because he makes weird noises. This is the most unprofessional. I'm so sorry.
Don't apologize. I like it.
So all of our teachers are trained, and when our districts and charters are selecting their curriculum, if you notice, these standards are pretty broad. All it's supposed to do is be a framework for any school that wants to have yoga, because we have a lot. I want to remind the board that this all started because I was having a statewide meeting with our charter and district health and PE specialists, and they asked me to write yoga standards because so many schools are offering yoga and they want it to count for PE. They had nothing. And so a teacher would go from one school to another, or a student would go from one school to another, and they would have yoga or they wouldn't have yoga, or the yoga programs would be really, really different. Well, when we started yoga, then they asked me, well, will you make strength and conditioning as well? I did. And this was a little more than a year ago now. Then last spring, they asked, well, hey, will you also do dance and outdoor recreation? So that's why there's 4. They were asked from our district and charters. And it was unanimous, not one person in the room. And we're talking all 41 districts attend or watch later. And then I also sent out a survey and asked if they wanted it done. Everyone wanted it done. Then these standards were sent back to them. They've all reviewed it. They've also had a public review. I've given some of that data. So that's a really long answer to your question, Board Member Hanson. But this is where we trust our district and charter leaders when they're putting their exact curriculum on how they'll teach the standards. But we wanted, and if you also look, these standards are really short compared to other core standards, because this is just supposed to be the framework for how this one course supplements the core standards for individualized lifetime activities, which is the only kind of PE credit this class will count for. There's 3 high school classes that count for graduation: fitness for life, participation skill and technique, and individual lifetime activities. this individual lifetime activities, now, if this passes through the board, we'll have 4 supplemental choices to get that graduation credit.
Does that help, Board Member Hanson? I think you're muted. Maybe not. Yeah. Yeah.
It's disappearing on the screen that I've got up, so I found it. It helps a little bit. I guess there's no other information that goes out, right? This is the standard, so there's no teaching guide or anything like that. So we're just counting on the schools to do that. I don't know if there's any other wording. I mean, learn and define sounds pretty basic. If there's any wording that keeps it from becoming a Hindu religion class, I don't have a good suggestion about how to improve that. I just am cautious about that getting us into trouble.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll leave that. I do have another question about recreation. And this one is just, I wondered if there was any thought into recreation-related volunteer activities like trail building and things like that. I didn't see anything mentioned there, and I know there's a lot of things people can do to get out in the outdoors. It didn't look like it came up in the comments. Just something I thought of when I thought of recreation, maybe because of what's going on where I live. There's a lot of folks involved in doing that.
I think it absolutely, oh, sorry, Chair Kravitz,
go ahead.
Answer that question.
Of course.
I'm just having a conversation. I apologize. I think it would fit into those standards, Board Member Hanson, if a school wanted to use that as part. I think it fits. Again, they're really broad. So I think, with any of these, anything outdoor, I mean, it could be archery, it could be hiking, biking. We have a school in Logan that does cross-country skiing. That would fit with this. If you were down south, you could do, some national parks and hiking and any of those outdoor activities absolutely would fit within this, including trail building. I don't know why that wouldn't fit if a school wanted to do that.
Yeah, my question is more specific as to volunteer activities to help with that. We have some stuff about leave no trace, and we have some things about outdoor etiquette. I know that a lot of different activities fit in as far as the actual sport or outdoor activity that you would be enjoying. I just wondered if we could add something about volunteer activities in the outdoors as part of that kind of philosophy, giving back to the outdoors or helping to improve the situation there. So if we look at that, cooperative skills, it's down further. I don't have it pulled up right here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's strand 4 with the cooperative skills, positive personal behavior.
I was looking at
No, go ahead, Jennifer.
5.3, for me, gets there, but maybe that's where Board Member Hanson we could enhance. But know and practice outdoor stewardship appropriate for various types of activity and locations. That particular standard kind of gets at it, but maybe it needs a little more explicit from what you're saying. But if listening to you and not being familiar with the recreation standards, that's the one that kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, Jody.
5.6 as well is where he was getting at. With that, recognize opportunities for outdoor recreation in one's community, expand by their self-improvement. The whole strand 5 actually is everything around volunteerism could absolutely be in there. And we could certainly add the word volunteerism into any one of these within strand 5, but strand 5 is where it would fit.
Okay, I would appreciate the addition. I don't know if I got a lag up here, but I would appreciate, and I'm sorry if I'm talking over folks because of that. I would appreciate the addition of and volunteer opportunities fit somewhere into strand 5. So maybe that's 5.6.
Is that something that, Jody, you would feel comfortable adding?
Absolutely. If the board wants to add, I think we could say recognize opportunities and volunteerism, or recognize Oh, I'd have to wordsmith it for a minute. But I think we could add in volunteerism into standard 5.6 easily.
Well, and it could be an or something, because you'd hate to have it be a required standard where maybe some schools don't have that opportunity as easily, like those near Board Member Hanson. So I don't know if it could be opportunities for outdoor recreation or volunteer work in one's community, et cetera, something like that.
Including
opportunities. Do you want to make a specific motion? Well, I guess we'd be in our first motion first, but would you want to add that amendment in there, Board Member Hanson?
I would. I don't know how we're going to do this, if we're going to try to approve all of these at once or if we're going to do them one by one, but I would appreciate that amendment to 5.6.
Okay, so what if we just say the amendment is to add volunteerism into the recreation strands, and then we let Jody wordsmith that? Does that work for you, Board Member Hanson?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. And Jody, does that work for you? Jody, you're muted. Oh.
I didn't know I wasn't on. If you couldn't see me, I said yes. I was nodding.
Oh,
muted because there's a little bird waking up.
Sorry. Okay. I think we'll just make sure we add that when we do the final motion. Let me go. Board Member Hanson, do you have any other questions before I move to Board Member Marsh?
No.
Okay.
Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you. Board Member Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Gravitt, Board Member Marsh here. I have two things. First thing, comment towards Scott's previous question that he had on yoga. I think we have to be careful of eliminating anything to do with Hinduism in there, because that would be like talking about Utah history without mentioning the church. That was the reason people moved here, but you can't get into the religious discussion of converting someone or somewhere there. But if somebody was to ask you about the game of basketball, where did it come from? How did it come about? You're going to start talking to them about putting the apple basket up on the side of the building and starting the game. So in the same sense, they're going to have to talk about where did it come from? This is where it started. It started in this culture, for this reason, and now it's moved on for us. So I think that worked there. And if it would help you, I would be happy to make a motion so that we can do amendments from here on out.
That would be excellent. Great point too, Board Member Marsh. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that we recommend the full board approval of the supplemental course standards for yoga, strength and conditioning, dance, and recreation.
Okay, maybe we'll put, I'm going to say including amendment on 5.6. Is it okay if I add that into the motion?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So let's see. The motion before the committee is that the committee recommends approval of the supplemental course standards for yoga, strength and conditioning, dance, and recreation, with the amendment of adding including volunteerism, or let's see, yes, including volunteerism at the end of 5.6. So that's the motion before the committee, and then we can go from there for discussion to that motion. Board Member Earl. Baby. Sorry. Board Member Earl, you have a question?
Yeah, instead of taking my thing off, I took my hand down. Yes, I have a possible amendment as well. Okay. And I'm going to reference the law that Board Member Marsh has referenced, because I do think you can't separate those out without dealing, yoga does have, its tenets in other areas of the world culture, and it's critical that people know that, but it is also critical that we're not teaching that religion as, as something, as a conversion process. There's a difference there, but it's important we don't eliminate that too. That's the key thing. So on strand 4, I'm in outdoor recreation supplemental activities. I just had I would actually have an amendment on one. Sorry, now I got to go back down and find it. It's on the 4.3, Rec 4.3. It says develop an appreciation for nature. And I would actually just stop it right there, because I'm not sure that will inform, it's an appreciation that will inform one's future worldview. I'm not sure how, an appreciation of nature is one thing, but then it's supposed to change your view of the world. What is that? I guess I'm asking what that is. How do you, and how do you measure that you just changed the world view of someone in nature in order to do number 4.2 or 4.3? So I would just develop an appreciation of nature. It doesn't need to go beyond that. I would strike the rest of that because I don't know how you measure that in the first place, right? You can definitely see a deeper appreciation. Someone can express that on number 4.4. There's ways of seeing that, but I would strike the end of that.
Okay, so do you want to make that amendment, or would you like Jody to respond first before you make that amendment?
Yeah, sure. We can have a response.
Mostly, I just want to see the baby. I'm just kidding. I want to hear the response.
There, we'll just make sure the camera's on him. I think that striking the rest of the sentence would still keep the value of the standard if that is the motion.
Okay.
I don't have an objection to it either way.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that input. Let's see. Board Member Earl, do you want to go ahead and make that motion then, or that amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion that on 4.4 or 4.3 that we strike that will inform one's future worldview.
Okay, so the amendment to the motion is to at 4.3 on the outdoor recreation supplemental standards, we strike that will inform one's future. Oh my gosh, I just lost it. That
worldview.
One's future worldview. I put one's future world, which that would be bad. Worldview. Okay, any discussion to that motion? Scott and Mark, are your questions to discuss that particular amendment? Board Member Marsh, go ahead.
I just forgot my hand. I'll take it down. Sorry.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure. Any other discussion to that amendment to the motion? Okay, let me remind you again, the amendment is to strike at the end of, the amendment is to strike that will inform one's future worldview on strand 4.3 in the outdoor recreation supplemental standards. Committee members, go ahead and vote on that amendment now. Okay, that amendment passes unanimously. Thank you, Board Member Earl, for that. Do we have any other questions or amendments that committee members want to make regarding these standards? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go back to the original motion, which is the committee recommends approval of the supplemental course standards for yoga, strength and conditioning, dance, and recreation as amended. Committee members, go ahead and vote on the final motion. Wait, sorry, there's a question. Board Member Earl.
I guess I could have said this after. I'm just really appreciative that we've expanded this out. Anyways, sorry, I didn't say that during my thing because of the motion, but I just wanted to make that comment that we're looking at the diverse, maybe talents of different children, not honing them in. So anyway, sorry, that was my comment earlier and I got sidetracked on the amendment. So
I think a thank you is never a sorry. So great, great addition. Okay, go ahead and vote. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Jody and Jennifer again, and committee members, and Brantley. Thank you, Brantley. He played a role in that, little bird. Okay, Jennifer, you're not going anywhere because we are on item number 6, which is the future of accreditation in Utah. And I wanted to check in with you, Jennifer, first. The decision points you provided, I'm wondering if you'd like to give us a little overview, and then I would like to move through those decision points, and so just talk through them one at a time, if that's okay, and if that works for you as well.
Sounds terrific. So Jennifer Johnson, Director of Teaching and Learning. I don't know if I need to introduce myself again, but here we go. And I just sent those amendments over to Nora Lee that you all made on Action 5, so those will be ready. So for item 6, the future of accreditation in Utah, just a reminder, this has been an advisory council we've had for the past several months that is represented by a vast representation from LEAs across our state. who have been kind of informing the process and making these recommendations. So I'm here as the facilitator of that council, but honestly, just kind of communicating their desires to you as a representative. So there are 3 decision points that we've started this conversation back in August. So hoping to make some decisions today as to whether that council continues meeting and working towards these recommendations, or if that committee should be disbanded. So with that said, the first decision point that we've had discussion around and that we're looking for a motion today is the state to become the accrediting body. So specifically right now, we have a regional accrediting body that serves as our accreditor, which is Cognia, who spoke this morning. And right now, the committee's recommendation from a previous council to the actual advisory council that we have now is to have the state take over that responsibility. So we've had discussions around this. We've had lots of what's the current state and all of those pieces. And so today there's a couple different motion options, and I'll just explain what those options might be. And depending on the decision of number 1, decision number 2 and 3 are not necessary. So if the committee decides to go ahead and explore this opportunity of having the state being the accrediting body, the committee would recommend that change, and then USBE would serve as the accrediting body. If the committee decides we want to remain with our current process and procedures, then we would choose option 2 to remain status quo. If the status quo option is selected, we do not need to look at decision points 2 and 3, as they are contingent upon option 1 being an affirmative of the state taking over that responsibility. So with that said, I can open it to questions or information that you might need to further weigh in on this decision. We've brought back information based on previous questions that you've asked that is in the board backup for today. So specifically, this particular one change that's kind of come through this process was the cost. And so what we would be doing is hiring staff in-house. And at this point, because the fiscal situation doesn't look great, we would still have the LEAs paying the price tag for accreditation as they do now. But it would be the responsibility of the LEA to pay that to USBE instead of Cognia. So that would be kind of the shift. And so the cost is not a huge difference if you look at the cost sheet that's been shared, but there is some difference there. And so there'd be some reduction to cost to the LEAs requiring as part of accreditation. Currently, accreditation is required by code, but there is no funding that goes towards accreditation. It's a responsibility of the LEA. If we were to take it over at the state level, we would continue that model where the LEAs would pay us, and that would be to basically have the staffing required to be able to do accreditation for our LEAs. So with that said, and I'm checking the chat box, none of those are needed, I'll remain quiet until there are questions for me.
Jennifer, I just have a clarifying question. I don't know if I'm being, let me just ask it. So on the decision points, it says that we don't move to decision point 2 and 3 unless option 1 is chosen for decision point 1. Couldn't an external accreditor do a systems approach, or can you help me understand that?
Sure. So for number 2, the reason I wouldn't encourage that going there is the current process already allows for LEAs to choose.
Right. Okay. That just clicked with me. I got it now. Thank you. I was just stuck on that for a second. Okay, committee members, what questions do you have? Board Member Hanson.
Here we go. Can you hear me? I'm having some computer trouble this morning. I wondered, since we have a representative from Cognia here, if we could hear from her on the advantages, disadvantages of internal accrediting organization versus an external accrediting process.
Okay, Tony, are you still available? I'm sure you are. Okay, would you go ahead and respond to that?
Absolutely, and I apologize. My internet has said it's unstable this morning, so if I disappear, I'll reappear by phone.
I think you're in good company. A lot of us are having unstable, whatever.
Thank you. 2 things I'd like to highlight and to answer that question. The advantages to the external accreditation with a regional accrediting commission such as Cognia, representing 3 of the regional commissions under one global commission, is that it is recognized that regional commission accreditation is recognized across the globe, in the state of Utah, and across the nation. by colleges, by universities. And in the case of mobile students who move for whatever reason to other states or even other types of schools, private or whatever, it is recognized. And so their credits seamlessly transfer and their diplomas are recognized because it's a regional accrediting authority. I would say it's the most recognized type of accreditation around the world. We even have 30 partners that work with us because they want to be also recognized. So that's the biggest number one advantage to students and to their abilities to succeed and achieve their dreams and their goals. The other thing about external accreditation is that it is a very stable in the sense that the standards are reviewed every 5 years, which is a longer cycle than most states that do accreditation. It is not subject to any kind of political authority, if you will. So things are massaged based on research. And the other thing that I would recommend that be considered is that I completely understand Utah. I have so much respect for the work that you're doing, as I said earlier, around the portrait of the graduate and the goals for your students. And you say P20 and mean it. And I think that fidelity is amazing. But when you say that the schools and the LEAs would spend their $1,200 to fund personnel at the State Department initially, then they lose many of the benefits that they currently have with Cognia, both in digital tools for continuous school improvement, the collection of data around student engagement, the ability to strategically plan using those tools, and a host of about 100 resources to assist them with accreditation, but most importantly, the ongoing continuous improvement throughout. And all of those tools and resources and documents and webinars and tutorials are really based in research, much of the research and the researchers you would recognize. So I think that there's a little bit lost under the tip of the iceberg when you think about what an external accreditation agency that's a nonprofit has at its fingertips to assist schools. The states that we work with right now, we can do some things collaboratively for, I think, much less work on your part that would meet the needs of Utah. So those are the two big advantages, is the regional accreditation and, of course, the amazing benefits that come with the membership that do not require additional expenditure. Training is not required. I know people think it's required. It's not. The resources are all there, but we help people find the resources in the one particular training that's about preparing for the engagement review. I hope that answered your question.
Board Member Hanson, do you have a follow-up?
I do. As far as the cost picture, that's another thing we're looking at in trying to make this decision. I understand Cognia is the main vendor for many of these. Is that cost picture that we see for the average cost, is that representative of what you would charge schools?
It is based on last year in the sense that membership cost has not gone up. This year, all reviews are virtual, and so there are no costs for travel for any team members. And while that's a COVID thing, I would tell you that we're getting very good at it. And I hope that will actually be an option, particularly for our rural schools in the future. And our lead evaluators and team members are pretty much loving it. There are ways to explain the evidence. And of course, in person is what everybody wants, both for students and for everything, but it has made it very viable. So that expense does not exist this year. The other thing is, I think that training was included as an expense. And again, it is absolutely not required. If school leaders use the tools at their disposal, they can absolutely prepare for a review without that training expense. The biggest expense that I want to point out is, and I do appreciate Jennifer Thronson is a master of planning and looking at what systems cost. But the systems that we have in place that are constantly updated within Cognia, many of those systems you never see. And those include the ways to track if you're going to charge for the membership fee, if you're going to adjust those tools, which at this point you wouldn't have. And we have people who are personnel working on the maintenance of those systems, not to mention that systems and the expense of systems is really hard to predict depending upon what the state already has and what you're really expecting from the system. So we have probably 14 different kinds of systems in support of the whole accreditation process and teaching and learning and professional development and the tools and everything else. So that part seems a little conservative from what I've seen that Jennifer created, but I know it's based on what you've done with systems before. So I think that overall, what you get for the prices that are listed, and then if you subtract out the travel, the training, and realize that that's a pretty conservative estimate on maintaining, not just establishing systems, but maintaining them, then I think you'd have a little better picture.
Tony, can I jump in and ask you a question about, I'm looking at some of the recommendations from our Accreditation Advisory Council update, and they were recommending the state to become the accrediting body. But I'm wondering, is it possible to have the state be the accrediting body, but partner with Cognia? And how would that look?
Absolutely. We have worked with different states depending on what their needs were. And although I haven't been at any of those accreditation meetings as a former superintendent, the greatest challenge you have is trying to align what the state expects that's compulsory, along with these other types of what feels like compulsory activities. And in Utah, accreditation is compulsory. So why not line all of those up? And absolutely, particularly with the tools that have come out in the last 3 to 5 years, we are working with states where what you expect besides the performance standards for accreditation can be woven in. It takes time though. I mean, that would have to be, there'd have to be some crosswalks of what is expected and how would that evidence be collected. But it absolutely should be aligned. And I think that's an important piece for superintendents and principals. It's not just the resource of money, it's the resource of time and brain energy.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what's very important to me is the alignment as a teacher and also as a state board member. I want that alignment. So thank you so much for those responses. Board Member Hanson, you have another question and then we'll go to Board Member Earl.
Please, thank you. I'd like to address kind of the same questions to Jennifer Thronson.
Good.
And if you have anyone who can help Jennifer, that would be fine. I'm wondering, since we're not showing any kind of a financial benefit to bringing this in-house, I wondered if you could talk to me about what we feel would be the benefits of bringing it in-house. And then also, if we did bring this in-house, would we force all of the LEAs to use our state accrediting organization, or would they have the option to go outside still? And this is a string of questions, but if they did have that option, what would that do as far as the predictability of the revenue that we'd be able to bring in as a state organization?
So at this point, I'm going to start with the last question and work my way backwards, just because it's fresh on my mind. So the council did discuss the option of, do we allow people to choose, or do we say the state is the state? So we looked at Wyoming's model, who has gone to a state model, but they also allow LEAs to choose if they want an accrediting body that's not the state. When they did that, they had 3 choose not to participate. The other districts in Wyoming all chose to go ahead and move to the state. They were a Cognia provider prior. And so that is an option the board could consider. The council recommended against that option. They believe that having one unified system makes the most sense in terms of creating equity and commonality across. And part of that goes to your second question related to what's the value? The value in particular for USBE to be the accrediting body is the alignment to our current initiatives. The ability for USBE to connect to the strategic plan and the drive of the board there, to be able to connect to Portrait of a Graduate as we look at the elements for accreditation, to be able to connect with the personalized competency-based learning framework that we've developed, accountability metrics, the ability of having that local control over accreditation and being able to align it to the things that the state board sees of value really leverages accreditation in a way that's more aligned with what our LEAs are talking about on a daily basis, what they're being asked to do by the legislature or the board, and really brings a cohesiveness to a system that right now they're asked particular things to meet the accreditation for this entity versus they're asked other things to, meet our reporting, our monitoring, our compliance measures that really could be brought together into one holistic view. So that's just, again, articulating what the committee has shared. The other thing is, in terms of transferability for students, 26 states do their own accrediting, and we don't have problems bringing in, students from those 26 states into our system. It's just part of the work that our LEAs do. And so from a cost point, we would be saving about $150,000 a year for our LEAs, which is not it's not a ton of money, but accreditation is currently about $743,000 for the Cognia experience, where at the state level, we'd get down to about $600,000. So there is some cost savings at the accreditation level if we go to a systems accreditation, which brings us to accrediting all schools. Right now, we only accredit secondary schools with 9th grade and up. So right now we're at 344 schools. Moving to the state model with a systems accreditation piece will bring us to 1,080 schools being measured, and really bring on a K-12 continuum rather than a secondary system, looking at the quality of instruction, the quality of schools across the system, rather than right now we have a secondary focus solely. So those would be some of the things that I would bring to the conversation, and happy to answer follow-up questions.
Okay. Board Member Hanson, do you have a follow-up for Jennifer before we move to Board Member Earl?
Quickly, I think that we can't conflate the decision on internal versus external and the decision to go to systems. We don't save any money if we don't go to the systems. And I have some further questions about that if we get to it, about whether a systems audit is the way to go. But is that true, Jennifer? We're going to charge them more money, or it's going to cost us more money if we do the same audit that's happening now internally. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be accurate. We've got to build systems that we don't currently have. Over years, we might be able to bring that cost down, but the initial startup cost doesn't afford for us to be cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Board Member Earl, go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually, one of the schools that I visited last week, a number of the members of that school have been part of accreditation teams, and I talked to them about how that worked and what their experiences were and such. And it sounds to me they felt that they were highly effective in what they're doing. And anyways, I'm really not convinced about the state level stepping in and doing this. I think we should work in conjunction, but I think there is some benefit to the outside entity, and they are using our local people already. Those are the ones going from district to district to do to help with the accreditation. So it's not like it's an complete outside group coming in and taking over anyways, it is those local people helping with those local decisions. And they were talking about how beneficial that was. And I'm sure something very similar would take place if the state were to do it as well. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really change that aspect in some ways, but I do like the idea that it's not, I do like the idea of an outside entity moving forward with that. Or at least that option, even though, and I think when you're saying, was it Montana? Is that who you quoted?
Wyoming.
Okay. Anyways, you were saying only 3 went with a separate accreditor to do and I think the reason why is because the state has their stuff set up, and then they're putting money into personnel. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's just, it doesn't lend itself, as much as we say, well, they can still have that option. Well, they still do, but it doesn't lend itself to people using it, right? Just out of convenience and other things. So, and the last thing, at least right now, that I want to address is if we are able to expand out our accountability system, what is going to take place with our accreditation process will have meaning, right? Because if we are using other measurement tools to measure our schools, it could be those same measurement tools that are relevant that we're doing with the accreditation, right? And because of that, it then creates a relevant system. So it's key that we move in that direction so that we can broaden what we're doing with our schools in a way that's relevant to the teachers and to our educators. So this, I guess it just speaks to the piece we passed yesterday, that in opening this up to a more, to a broader measurements, then we're also opening up this process too, to a more relevant aspect. It's not just a numbers and the growth numbers at the end of the year. It's actually processes and measurement tools that we're working on, and the accreditation. It's too bad we can't use some of that accreditation information for that end of the year, right? Assessment that piece, that turnaround piece. And I'd love if we changed that name completely. But anyways, I won't go on anymore. But do you see what I'm saying? It creates a system that is more focused on the needs of local schools and those local students, local teachers, and their focus. So anyways, that's my thoughts there.
Yeah, and that speaks to that alignment, like portrait.
May I respond to that, Jen?
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
So, and I think Board Member Larry, or Earl, you hit on the exact reason why the council has expressed the need to go to the state level, is the relevance. They have appreciated, their favorite thing is the peer review. They love it. It is part of what they are proposing would be the future model for Utah, is that we would include that peer review process moving forward, because that is the most valuable piece for them, is having others come in, look at what they're doing, give them insights coming from their systems. They greatly appreciate that piece, and that would be a continuation. And just a reminder for the committee, this is the council's recommendation. The council is representative of superintendents, assistant superintendents, district leaders, building principals, all the folks that have been through accreditation and have gone through this work. I have never been through accreditation. I would love to own my naivety in this space. It's not an area I have experience in. So as I listen to the council and their desire to move from what they experienced, there are a lot of great things that they love and enjoy and that we could bring into our model. But that alignment, that connection, that relevance is not as easily accessible when you're using a national provider versus a local provider. So just to reiterate the voices that aren't here today, because I get to be the lucky one who represents the council, their drive is to see that greater connectivity, knowing that that could have power in improving our schools. So if we continue to have an external provider, as I started this out, we will work with them to do what we can. But if we are local, we have the most control over being able to get those influences into play, because we know where we're headed, we know where we are, we know what tools we have, we know what we're looking for in terms of what quality looks like in Utah. And that is the opportunity that the field sees in taking what is great in the current system and leveraging that up with the Utah head culture and experience. Sorry, my voice is having a rough day.
Jennifer, I want to thank you for speaking on behalf of the Accreditation Advisory Council, and I'm having to remind myself too that the information you're providing was a board request. So you're speaking on behalf of what information the board requested and bringing to us. So I just want to make sure committee members remembered that this wasn't a staff request. This is something that we as a board and a committee requested, and you are acting in that way. Do we have any other? Let's see, Board Member Cannon and then Board Member Marsh. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question. This first question I'd like to address to Tony, please. Okay. She mentioned that they have performance standards for accreditation. In our first discussion of accreditation, I asked if when a school was accredited, we had some kind of an idea of how rigor, a national look at rigor in terms of is Utah preparing our children to be citizens of the nation, citizens of the world, and we're giving them the most rigorous possible education we can. And I got shot down on that, and I got told that accreditation was just a self-assessment of how we were doing. So when you mentioned performance standards that you use for accreditation, I'd like to know if any of those performance standards address rigor and where those performance standards come from, and how rigorous are those performance standards?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, actually, we have, for an individual school, we have the performance standards have 30, there are 30 standards. There are 3 domains. The first domain is leadership. There are 10 standards in leadership. There are 12 standards in the second domain of learning, the teaching and learning, which is, I think, what you're referring to. And the final 8 standards currently are in the domain of resources. And it's really how that school aligns those resources to support learning, to support equity, and to support excellence. And so rigor is addressed in the learning standards. You asked about comparisons. Each school receives something called an IEQ rating, and they can compare that to the norm. Because we accredit not just one type of school. For example, we accredit charter schools, we accredit public schools, we accredit private schools, we accredit digital schools, we even accredit special purpose schools. We do not show a state comparison, Member Cannon, so we don't have data around that. But what I can do is request data for Utah about Utah schools, if that would be helpful to you. And the other thing is that each of the schools gets a very detailed narrative report. The report is meant to highlight where they are incorporating best practices to the point of being embedded, all the way to where they've perhaps just initiated a best practice, and where are they on that continuum looking at each standard. And so then the narrative addresses patterns that the team sees, particularly in light of things like high expectations for students and rigor. And so the narrative is not the same as a score sheet. It's not as simplistic as a letter grade for a school. It is very personalized to the school about where they are and what they need to do to exceed at those standards. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Well, I'd like to say, if you were to give me data about Utah for Utah schools, how would that data look if I compared it with data you had for schools in Virginia? Would that data show that in Utah we are doing the best we can to add sufficient rigor to our education of students?
It's a great question. I would be happy to request that type of data. Of course, I think you're talking about public schools versus public schools, not privates or charters.
Right.
Yes. I don't know that I would have that at my fingertips, but if you don't mind, I could certainly make that request.
Well, I just think we're paying a lot of money for accreditation. And if I'm going to be paying money for something, I would like to get some information that's really relevant about how well we are doing for our students educationally, rather than just a self-assessment of, how are things today, and what are we doing here. So I'm kind of speaking in interest of additional rigor, or at least knowing that our rigor is sufficient to do well by our students. So
I'm sorry, I can tell you that the average IEQ score in Utah is higher than a lot of other states. And I only know this because I was looking at some things around a couple of different states, but the actually average IEQ score in Utah is generally higher for those schools. But I also want to kind of think about for a minute, under your goals for your students in Utah, one of them is personalized teaching and learning. Mm-hmm. And over the last 4 or 5 years, Cognia has really worked to make the approach of accreditation personalized. Mm-hmm. So we don't ask you how many library books you have anymore. We ask, what is your mission and vision? What have you promised your stakeholders and your state? And are you living up to those promises? Are you exceeding expectations? We look at 7 learning environments for students, starting with high expectations environment. And we look at how are they engaged. We have very high expectations for the student engagement and the relevance to the student. We have surveys that have been research-based and built around the concept of student engagement to get to the heart of personalized learning and personalized teaching. And so it's hard. I know many states have letter grades for their schools, and I feel like it's not fair to call a student an A student or a C student any more than it's fair to call a whole group of people at a school an A school or a B school or a C school. I believe in competition, but I also know that the students in Utah benefit from the fact that you have such a very strong set of goals within your state. I can ask for more data for you, but we don't look at it as simple, as just a simple comparison. We look at the complex picture.
Thank you for that. May I ask a question of Jennifer now?
Of course.
Okay, Jennifer, I'm intrigued with your idea that moving forward, we may be interested in accrediting all 1,080 schools in Utah. Could you address that for me about what value you see in accreditation, why it has been limited to secondary schools only, and moving forward, why it would be a benefit to accredit all 1,080 schools in our state? And if those schools are accredited, I'm wondering if I'm thinking when you talk about accrediting a district only, I think about my district that is absolutely huge. And within that district, there are schools that have A grades. There's one school that we can't get to exit from turnaround. How, with that kind of variety within a district, what value would accrediting a district be versus accrediting those individual schools? And what would we gain by accrediting elementary schools as well?
Absolutely. And I'm just going to speak from the council because they've had some good conversations around this, as well as the folks that came last time to our meeting on accreditation from Ogden and Canyons and Davis, because they have gone through the systems accreditation. And so their experiences of expanding beyond the high school experience. And the reason for high school is that transferability, that just like when we want a teacher licensed individual coming from a accredited university, it's the same kind of thing. We want to make sure there's some level of standard. And so when the kids transfer high schools, that there's this level of standard being met, and that's what accreditation is for. When we talk about your district in particular, there is a variety of schools within that system. Same with Davis. Davis is one of our largest school districts in the state. And the value that they found from systems accreditation really allowed for them to look at the continuum of services, knowing that it takes the entire system to make a successful student, that it doesn't stop in elementary or only start in secondary, but it's going to take from pre-K through 12 to really have that experience. So as they look at feeder systems, the kids started out in that turnaround elementary. What does that mean for the middle school and high school? How do we need to do things differently? As we look at how we turn schools around, part of it's the powerful leader in the school, but part of it's the support they get from the school district. And so having an accreditation process that involves all of the schools really becomes, it's about all of us and all of us working together to achieve great outcomes and have impact for students. So as we look at the system, being able to bring elementaries into the fold is really that conversation you hear from middle school and high school teachers. Well, if they had learned this in elementary school, we wouldn't be dealing with it now. And so it really brings the whole system to the table, to the conversation around what does quality look like? Because quality, although there be some variations at a middle school or high school level, the basic indicators of quality apply across the setting. And so to leave a particular group out may actually disadvantage that particular group from really looking at who's being monitored. If the state sees accreditation as valuable, why have we only monitored a portion of the population? Is that the only part that matters is secondary? Ninth grade and up. We don't even deal with middle school necessarily unless ninth grade's in a middle school setting. And so as we kind of look at the progress, that was the most powerful thing. As Ogden's going through right now and Canyons is embarking on systems accreditation, it's bringing everyone to the table and looking at all of the pieces of the system. To have a school work on its own is not as powerful as having a school supported by the district. In a lot of ways, a lot of things can happen. I look at Canyons as an example of a school that's been in turnaround for years. And when the school district and the school partnered strategically, they were able to start moving out of turnaround status because the support that they needed from the district was provided while the school and the school leadership took on their role and responsibility. But together, that hadn't happened at the level that it happened when they finally started making movement. And so that's where this accreditation piece. Additionally, within systems accreditation, they do a random sampling of schools. So, and Tony can probably explain this way better than I can, but basically they look at the schools and they take, it's probably a strategic, random might not be as the right word, but they are looking at those schools that are underperforming. They're looking at the different metrics to say, we want a great representation from your LAA. So in Davis, they have 90 schools, I believe, or close to that. They evaluated 27 of those schools individually as part of that systems accreditation. So they took all of those different experiences, turnaround schools, high performing schools, and really looked at it as a system to say what in the system could be improved to improve outcomes for all. And knowing that some of the systems are going to need more strategic supports at schools that don't have those things in place. So that's the message that I've kind of walked away with from the council is really it's about bringing everyone together to achieve these outcomes for students. And those outcomes don't start in ninth grade. They start very early and being able to have this continuum of quality that is able to be talked about together. As we look at our board, initiatives, they don't say high school only. They're systems plans, and it takes the entire system working together to achieve the strategic goals. And so as we kind of look at how this can do that, it really is about looking at the pieces that make up the whole together so that we can work as one to move things forward. So that would probably be how I would frame that. But if you have additional questions, please do so.
May I ask a couple of follow-ups?
Janet, can I just interrupt one thing? I hate to get off. I know we're talking about systems and that approach. I mean, it does go into the overall conversation, but I'd really like to make a decision on decision point number one before we get off track. Is your question to Jennifer about the systems versus the individual school accreditation?
Yes. I just want to know if any other states have trailblazed and done systems accreditation. And further, is there a difference between how successful system accreditation is for a small district, which most districts in the United States are, versus immense districts, like we have 4 or 5 of those in Utah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will answer those two questions, and I think what board chair is trying to get at is we have to decide one before we.
Yes, I am. So if you could just answer briefly, and then if we need to go into more detail when we get there, just also looking at time.
Yeah. Thank you for accommodating me, Jenny.
Oh, anytime. Well, not anytime, but most times.
So to answer Board Cannon's questions, there are other states that do systems accreditation across the state. I don't have the number, but I know it does happen through all this work kind of investigating. The second part, it's lost now due to that fun conversation. 1 second.
Does the size of the district make a difference in the success of the accreditation?
Absolutely. So, if you look at a systems accreditation for a single charter school, it is basically a school-based system, right? So they're going to look at the school. We talked with, I think it's Daggett, who's on the council. He has 1 high school. So this would expand to his other schools as being, brought into the fold to really look at this as a systems improvement. So a small school district is going to see this kind of cohesion across instead of just the sole school being identified for accreditation. And then as we get larger and larger, I'd say our bigger school districts have chosen Canyons is a medium-sized school district, have chosen to move towards systems accreditation because they see the value in the cohesiveness. And so thanks to Cognia's innovation of offering that opportunity of school or systems, as our council spent a lot of time on this topic in particular, because there was mixed views, as there is in this group. It took them a while to kind of talk through. Many of them hadn't been through systems accreditation, so they had to get informed. But ultimately, at the end, they said, it's systems. And we even had the discussion, do we want to offer systems or schools? And they, at the end of the day, said, no, it should be systems. It makes sense that we look at the cohesive whole rather than the individual parts. And so that is why I'm not bringing the consideration from the council, at least, for a recommendation of choice, which is honestly was very interesting to me, because I'm always like, I'm sure the LEAs want choice.
Yeah.
But that council really felt confident that there's so much more power in systems accreditation, whether you're small. If you're small, it's not going to have much of a difference because you're a single school. But as you get up to even a few schools, it starts to build a cohesion that we are lacking when we do school-based accreditation and only address our high schools. So with that said, the council truly was supportive of just a clear recommendation of systems.
Thank you for those questions, Janet. I want to hear from board member Marsh, and then after listening to this conversation, I'm ready to make a motion unless somebody else has one, and then at least we'll have a motion on the table and we can discuss from there. So board member Marsh, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Gravitt. I wanted to speak specifically to a couple of parts of this. I think that as we look at that, I am really a huge fan of the systems. We're a small school district where I came from as a local school board member, and it was like living in a small laboratory and being able to see the full results. And I was fortunate enough that I lived with the person that is the assessment director in our district also. So I had numbers at my fingertips to look at it. I think that it builds more of a community, because for years in our district, the schools in the upper levels, middle schools and high school, were saying, well, the elementary teachers, they just kind of sit down and teach the basics and it's not a big deal. But when we looked at it truly and we switched our reading program 2 or 3 years ago, it has made a huge difference in our middle school, and that's starting to creep into our high school now as that reading program ages. So I think that you've got to look at the systems, because that's going to be more effective for kind of a team atmosphere that you have there. Dr. Thronson, if you could answer to me, when you look at schools around the country, it's been thrown out 2 or 3 times in this discussion and many others, the importance of comparing ourselves to other states. Is it, as you've looked at it, is it really even fair to try and compare us to that when our core standards and our standards that we have in our state are different than other states around? Could you answer that?
Board Chair, may I respond?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes. Board Member Marsh, I think, yes, it would be difficult because we have different standards and things that drive us. So for our state board, the strategic plan would be our rigor. So when we look at what is the rigor of accreditation, if we move to a state model, the rigor is going to be driven by our initiatives coming out of the state, because that is where the alignment will come from. So if we believe that our strategic plan is rigorous, then accreditation will be rigorous. If we believe that our portrait of a graduate leads to rigorous education, then our accreditation process that would be aligned to that would be rigorous. So it really comes from the foundational pieces that the board is building that lead to that rigor in education. In terms of comparisons, we can compare graduation rates. We can compare the number of students who go on to get advanced degrees, those kinds of things across states to say, did we prepare students for the eventual outcomes? I mean, that's one way to look at this from a rigor standpoint. But as we look at how our system perpetuates rigor, that's where a state-based accreditation system would afford for us to leverage the rigor that the board is building into the system to measure rigor in that way.
Thank you, Dr. Thronson. Madam Chair, I would be willing to make a motion at this time if that's appropriate.
Sure, go ahead.
I would move that we move the Accreditation Advisory Council recommendations forward to the full board for review and approval, please.
Okay, then I need to just clarify some things, because I don't know that we have we made the decision what our recommendations are. Does that make sense, Board Member Marsh?
Yes and no. I mean, because it's just asking, I guess what I'm trying to say was that they sent forth their recommendations, which is, as we've heard, maybe it's not written well enough that we go with the systems approach.
Okay.
Am I out in the weeds somewhere? Help me, straighten me out.
No. I'm asking you to help me. Could we take it decision point at a time? Like, I would like a motion for decision point number 1, because we need to know. And again, I have some ideas for decision point number 1. We've got to decide if we want to keep the state becomes the accrediting body, or we keep an external accreditor as the accrediting body. Does that make sense, Board Member Marsh?
Yeah. Would that be in the form of if I kept my motion the way it is as amendments, or should we just back up and do them one at a time?
For me, just because my brain is simple right now, could we back up and just do one at a time? Please.
Sure, let's do that.
Thank you.
Give us our first one and lead us out, if you would, please.
Okay, well, so
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you so much for being willing. I'm just looking at what we've discussed, and I'm also looking at time. I'm going to throw this out there, and then we can discuss and amend from there. But after listening to you in this conversation and looking at decision point number 1, but this also kind of absorbs decision point number 3, I think Jennifer would have to step in. But I would move to keep the external accreditor as the accrediting body with the assurance, and I'm going to put it in the chat box just a minute, with the assurance that the external accreditor work closely for more goal and data alignment with the state of Utah. Because if we're going to do an external accreditor, I would like to make sure that we align with our goals for the state of Utah. So that's my motion before the committee. Let me read it one more time. The committee moves to keep the external accreditor as the accrediting body with the assurance that the external accreditor work closely for more goal and data alignment with the state of Utah. Do we have any discussion to that motion on decision point number 1? Okay, yes. I see. Yes, Board Member Hanson.
Yeah, this is Scott Hanson, and my video is not working well. Generally, I am a do-it-yourself guy. I still change my own oil, do the brakes on my cars, even though that doesn't make much sense financially. But in this case, I just don't feel like it's the right time to start grading our own papers here and putting in an organization to do this. We've got a lot on our plates with COVID and all the disruptions we've had. I'm speaking in support of Chair Gravitt's motion, but certainly not precluding us from going in-house in the future. What I'd like to see is that we would develop some sort of a continuous improvement group and start with that as a base, working with our turnaround schools and that sort of thing, and then perhaps that turns into an accrediting effort at some time in the future. I think that we can also, our vendor's been here and heard this conversation. They know that how capable we are and where we're thinking. I think that maybe there would be some possibilities to lower some of the external costs as well in our conversations with them, because we are a competitor, because we can do this in-house. So for the time being, and certainly not excluding this from happening in the future, I'd speak in favor of the motion.
Thank you for your input, Scott. Board Member Cannon, do you have discussion to the motion?
Yes, thank you. One of the things that did appeal to me about having our state be the accreditor was that they would be evaluating compliance with all of the things that they assure us that they're doing. And, you know, we have that huge assurances document, and it's a concern to me that it's a check mark, and I don't know if that check mark actually means that they're doing the things that we've got on that assurance document. So I would love it if our external accreditor had some kind of input in looking, you know, in dealing with those assurances before they give an accreditation to a school. But I would be in favor of Jenny's motion also. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, just quickly, I am in favor of this motion. I think this is I think once again, to try to build something out, time-wise, cost, everything. We've got something that's good here. They know what we need. They know what we want. We're not just, going along with whatever. We need to be working on Utah's goals. So thank you. That's it.
Okay. Board Member Marsh, you want to speak to the motion? Okay. Board Member Hanson.
Okay, I just took my hand down. Sorry about that. I said
no problem.
I needed to say.
Okay, Board Member Hanson, did you want to speak to the motion?
Just one more thing that I forgot to say. I understand that this course of action does not preclude us from doing systems audits. We're doing that now. We can continue to do that in the future if we see that that's the right way to go. And again, I'm not closing the door on this entirely. I just think that now is not the right time. Let's vote.
Okay, so the motion before the committee, and we will have to, after this one, we will address the systems question, but the motion before the committee is to move to keep the external accreditor as the accrediting body with the assurance that the external accreditor work closely for more goal and data alignment with the state of Utah. Go ahead and vote on that motion now, please. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. And then for Norlie's sake, I put the motion in the chat box and hopefully you got that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, Jennifer, help me out a little bit. So it said we kind of did a little something different. So we can still move if we want to do a systems or an individual school approach. Is that correct, Jennifer? Even with this motion that passed?
Well, Tanya has the authority for whether we can do systems.
Okay.
School. So I mean, you could say no, but their model affords for that. So I don't think any further discussion is needed.
No further discussion is not needed.
Chair Gravitt.
Yeah,
I think that it's whether or not the State Board of Education is going to require a systems accreditation and no longer allow for the single accreditation. So I think that's more the question, is what does the State Board of Education want in moving forward? And then they would ask that of the accrediting body.
Okay. That makes sense. So maybe this next part, we can't necessarily do a motion, or I suppose we can, but I do want to hear from committee members. Do we want to require a systems accreditation instead of an individual school? So, and then Patty, did you want to talk more about the systems approach?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just in speaking with some of the things that Board Member Marsh was talking about as well. I was able to be a part of the systems approach when I was in Davis School District, and I just wanted to speak to what it meant to Davis School District. Previously, there seems to always be a little bit of competition between schools, even within a district, about even through sports, whether it's academics, whatever it was. And when we brought in the systems accreditation, it seemed to really do that alignment and collaborative efforts. It really seemed to bring those high achieving schools that were really good in one area, and they became partners and colleagues with schools that weren't doing so well, because it meant something as a system. It was Davis School District instead of one high school against another. Yeah. And so it really brought those PLCs, those professional learning communities, together more closely, and really contributed to that feeling of this is for all of us. And if you're a student in Davis School District, no matter where you're at, then you deserve that same quality of education. So I was just going to share that experience, having been a part of it, and the differences between doing it individually and what that looked like, and then doing it as a systems.
Oh, I really appreciate that perspective. Again, committee members, I just want you to be aware of the time. We have about 24 minutes. So let me hear some comments or thoughts on the systems approach. Board member, Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I actually would, I still think it should be left up to the district. It shouldn't be something that they're required or forced into. And I would like to make a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that that the system approach be left up to the decision of a local district. I have no doubt that many will decide to do that, but I think it should be left up to the choice for the local entities to choose that. So
okay, so the motion before the committee is that the systems approach be left up to the local district or So the LEA. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Hanson.
I'll speak in favor of it. I think that this is one, we've got a system that's working now, and if the system's approach is truly preferable to everyone, everyone will choose that. No need for us to mandate.
Okay. Board Member Cannon.
Yeah, it would seem to me like a systems approach might be more worthwhile if we are accrediting all schools instead of just secondary schools. And I understand that with the first motion, that maintains us as accrediting just secondary schools. Is that correct?
Well, Jennifer, will you speak that? Because my sense is that we can choose, right?
So the LEAs choose when they go through accreditation, if they choose systems, that it's going to be they're accrediting all of their schools.
Yeah.
So it's already kind of built into the model.
Yeah.
Okay. So if they choose the systems model, so my conundrum was, are we just accrediting secondary, and what value is that for a systems if we're not accrediting all of them? But your information to me says if they choose this to accredit the system, they take a look at all of the schools.
Yes.
That's the way that it's designed.
Okay, I'm in favor of that. Thank you for the clarification.
Janet, by that, do you mean the motion that's before the committee?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Board Member Hanson, you have a comment? Oh, no. And just speaking from my thoughts, I really, really would prefer a systems use for everyone in the state of Utah, but I can respect where the committee's going, and to give LEAs a choice. I just see so much value based on what we've heard in having all of us kind of on the same team and going together. It builds camaraderie. It feels like the right way to move. I'm not seeing any more discussion, so I'm going to go back to the motion. Board Member Earle's motion to the committee moves or recommends that the systems approach be left up to the decision of the local education association. The LEA. I think I just did something weird. Do we have, go ahead and vote on that. Okay, that motion carries unanimously. And Norlie, did you understand what I just said?
I did.
Okay, thank you so much. Tony, thank you for being here. Jennifer, thank you for being here. Do we have to do anything, Jennifer, do we have to do anything with the third decision point, since we kind of melded that into the first motion? Okay.
Yeah. Nope, you're good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, committee, we have 20 minutes, and I think we can do this to do our last action item, which is R277929, the Purple Star School Program. And this is a new board rule. And I think it was kind of fun to read through this one, just dealing with making transition smoother for military children to establish Purple Star School programs in Utah. And I believe we have Ben Rasmussen here to talk about this for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair Gravitt. Some of you may know that amongst my responsibilities here, I am the Commissioner for the Interstate Compact on Educational Opportunity for Military Children. And so there is a new program that is being proposed in connection with our State Council for Military Children today. It's the Purple Star School Program, and we're proposing that this be added in our board rule R277929. The Purple Star School Program has been implemented in about a dozen states so far, and what it does is if schools take specific steps to make sure that there are smooth transitions for military children when they move on military orders, then the school gets a Purple Star School designation, which they can use to advertise their school, to recruit, to show families that they offer those services to military families, and it's proven to be a great service to military families as they move and as they choose where they're going to relocate within the state. So basically, you can see in the rule that we've outlined the steps that the school would have to take to apply to get the designation, and if they meet those criteria, they would be awarded the Purple Star School designation. You have in your backup letters from 4 different councils that are supporting this program in the state. And then we have Brian Garrett here, who is with the Utah Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, and he would just like to speak on behalf of this program briefly.
Okay. Brian, do you want to go ahead and speak?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I want to, if you don't mind, I want to drop just a little info, more than a little, but I want to drop some information in the chat, and this may not work. Anyway, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. One of the things that is particularly troubling for us as we look to support military and veteran families is the number of moves that they have. In this program, we feel will really help assist that and will allow schools that want to engage. And we're already hearing through our military circles, Hill Air Force Base Elementary in particular, is very close to meeting all of the requirements for this. But to encourage our schools to participate in this program, when an average of 6 to 9 moves for our military children, and this is coming from the Military Child Education Coalition, it's very taxing for them and all of the challenges and problems that go along with it. And we feel this is an opportunity for us as a state to continue to lean forward in the work that we do to support our military children. I would like to mention the Secretary of Defense put out a requirement earlier this year that the services consider child education and spouse reciprocity when looking at future base and future missions, basically economic development opportunities for the state. The Air Force did a study that they released about 6 weeks ago, and Utah has 2 of only 3 bases out of the 153 Air Force bases that were ranked green in both education and spouse reciprocity. All of the other 151 bases across the country fell short on that. The Hill Air Force Base and then Roland Wright Air National Guard Base here in Salt Lake City out by the airport were the two of the 3 that ranked green. And I attribute that to the great work that the Board of Education and the staff, I can't say enough about Ben and Angie and all of the support that we have from them and their willingness as we bring different ideas to them or different issues that we're having to just jump in and help us with these kids. The reciprocity piece to that conversation speaks to our teachers. We have a large population of military spouses who are teachers, and facilitating that state-to-state transfer and the work that our offices did, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to pass that legislation has been held as model legislation for the other states. And there are only 5 other states when it comes to reciprocity doing what we do. So I'm here to speak on behalf of this because I think it's a great program for our children, but more importantly, I just want to thank this body on behalf of the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs and the constituents that we serve for all of the support in the past and your continuous and ongoing support. And again, cannot say enough about the great work that Ben does, putting up with all my great ideas when I bring into it, or the challenges or hassles. With that, I'm happy to field any questions if you'd like.
Oh, thank you so much. Committee members, what questions do you have for either Ben or Brian? Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
Specific questions, but I'd like to speak in favor of this. I had an opportunity in the last couple of years to help a military family who ran into some real problems with just this issue. They had a family with a few kids. One of their kids was special needs, but also high performing in certain areas. They contacted a school ahead of time. They knew they were going to move. Because of the school's rules, they weren't able to register until they had residence, which means they needed to have a utility bill or a deed or something when they got here. By the time they had that and registered, it was just a couple days before school. All the classes were full. So they ran into just headache after headache trying to get the needs of their kids taken care of. And it resulted in some real difficult educational outcomes, especially for this special needs child. So I would really like to see this be in our rule, and also really taken seriously. And I hope we have a lot of schools that take this seriously and certify, especially the ones that are right around the bases. This was an off-base school, lots of military folks in that neighborhood. So there is a real need for this. The military compact doesn't go far enough. And this helps some families.
Thank you, Scott. That perspective is so good. Any other questions or comments? I am not seeing any more questions or comments, and so I am ready for a motion if somebody would like to make that.
I will do that.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
I'll move that we adopt R277-929 draft 1 and forward that on to the board for approval, for final approval.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve R277-929 draft 1 on first reading and forward that to the board for full approval on second and final reading. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, go ahead and vote now. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ben, for all your hard work. And committee members, guess what? You have 11 extra minutes that you can do whatever you want with because you have finished the work for today. So thank you, staff. Thank you, committee members. Have a great Friday. Do something you love and have a good weekend. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good work, you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.